On May 15, 2026, the leadership of the Federal Reserve is scheduled to change. This transition marks a deadline where the central bank must confront a plan to address a debt crisis that has now outpaced the growth of the entire United States economy. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer described a mirror effect, where we confuse our subjective experience with objective reality. We see our degrees, our 401ks, and the dollars in our bank accounts, and assume they represent a permanent state of security. The objective math tells a different story. The U.S. government is currently printing $1 trillion every 100 days. To grasp the scale of that debt, imagine spending exactly $1 every single minute. It would take more than 32,500 years to spend $1 trillion, a span of time that dwarfs a single human life. When we compare that 32,500-year spending rate against a government that prints $1 trillion every 3 months, it becomes clear that we have passed the point where this debt can ever be repaid. The dollar is disconnected from a finite standard, and 3 distinct economic forces are now converging on the 2026 deadline, threatening to render the current debt-based system insolvent. History rhymes, and our current trajectory began in 1971. President Richard Nixon removed the U.S. dollar from the gold standard, effectively transforming it into a currency backed entirely by government debt. To stabilize this new debt-based money, the government reached a deal in 1974 to price global oil exclusively in dollars. This created the petrodollar, forcing every nation to hold U.S. currency if they wanted to power their industries. But the international dominance of the dollar is tied to stability in the Middle East. In 1956, the Suez Crisis disrupted global trade and forced the British government to reckon with a debt load it could no longer sustain. The Suez Crisis effectively signaled the end of the British pound's global supremacy by trapping their debt. Today, the conflict in the Strait of HORMUZ threatens the same oil-based foundation that supports the U.S. dollar. As the international backing for our currency begins to fracture, the domestic financial system is approaching a scenario designed to liquidate the savings of the working class. In 1974, the same year the petrodollar was established, the ERISA Act fundamentally changed retirement. It shifted the burden of saving from guaranteed corporate pensions to the 401k, a system where your future is tied directly to the volatility of the stock market. Since then, the government has used constant money printing to keep the market afloat. The $39 trillion national debt acts as a temporary stimulant, creating the appearance of growth while devaluing the currency. This has created an impossible choice for the Federal Reserve. If they raise interest rates to save the dollar's value, the interest payments on the national debt will bankrupt the government. If they keep rates low, inflation will continue to erode the public's purchasing power. Without cheap capital from the Fed, the stock market loses its primary driver. For the boomer generation relying on 401ks, this creates a scenario where their primary savings are positioned for a significant downward correction, just as they enter retirement. This convergence points toward a massive retirement crisis. As savings evaporate, we are seeing the early stages of a homelessness event that will leave younger generations to manage the economic fallout. Those younger generations are already struggling under a different form of debt. Higher education has transformed from a path to the middle class into a student loan trap that follows graduates for the rest of their lives. Today, highly educated workers are often forced into the gig economy to service their loans, only to see technology like driverless Waymo cars beginning to navigate the same streets where they earn their living. Artificial intelligence is now displacing high-level cognitive labor, performing functions once exclusive to white-collar professionals. The automation that once impacted the factory floor has moved into the office, targeting the roles of doctors, lawyers, and educators. A middle class without stable income cannot fund 401ks or provide the tax revenue required to service the national debt, removing the primary economic engine that sustains the government. You cannot stop a macroeconomic shift. However, wealth is historically transferred during periods of high volatility. Survival in 2026 requires moving away from paper assets. During the 2008 crash, successful investors used debt strategically to acquire hard real estate. They stepped in when banks were desperate to offload physical assets for a fraction of their previous value. This is owning the production. Instead of trusting a stock ticker, You own an asset producing a necessity, like food, energy, or housing. The asset generates a commodity. The commodity produces cash flow, which allows you to acquire more production. While fiat currency can be printed into worthlessness, tangible assets like gold and silver have a finite supply. They have served as a store of value through every currency transition in history. Preparing for 2026 requires a shift in priorities. You must move past the subjective illusion of saving printed currency and embrace the objective reality of owning assets that produce real value.